Hello, everyone. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about factoring perfect squares. So if you recall, when we learned about multiplying, if we had a plus b squared, that really meant a plus b times a plus b. And we could multiply that by double distributing or by the fact that we square the first, so that's a squared, plus we do a times b times 2, so that's 2ab, plus square the second, which is b squared. So if it's a plus b times a plus b, it's plus 2ab. If it's a minus b squared, it's minus 2ab. So now what we're going to talk about today is identifying that and factoring it if we know that. So in order to identify it, what we want to do is we want to look at the first term. So 16n squared is a perfect square because it's 4n times 4n. 9 is a perfect square because it's 3 times 3. So then we want to look at our middle term. Is negative 24 4n times 3 times 2? And the answer is yes. Therefore, that is a perfect square trinomial. So it's just 4n minus 3 squared. So when we look at number 2, since 15 is not a perfect square, 16x squared is, 15 is not, we have to factor using our other forms. So here, a is not 1. So I'm going to do 16 times 5. And I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's 16 times 15, which is 240. So we want numbers that multiply to be 240, that add to be negative 32. So that's negative 12 and negative 20. So we do our plus sign. So it's 16x and 16x, and then negative 12 and negative 20. 16x and negative 12 can both be divided by 4, so that gives me 4x and negative 3. 16x and negative 20 can both be divided by 4, so that gives me 4x and negative 5. So that factored is 4x minus 3 times 4x minus 5. So now number 1, determine if it's a perfect square trinomial. Right, yes or no? If so, factor it. So x squared is a perfect square. 64 is 8 times 8, so that's a perfect square. So now the question is the middle term. So if I do the a term, which is 1, 8 times 1 times 2, I do get 16. So yes, that's a perfect square trinomial. And it factored is x minus 8 squared. So here, m squared is a perfect square. 25 is 5 times 5. So 10 is 10. 2 times 5 times 1. Yes. So yes, it's a perfect square trinomial. So it's m plus 5 squared. P squared is a perfect square. 64 is a perfect square, so that's 8 times 8. So now we're looking at 8p. Is 8p 8 times 1 times 2? No, so it's not a perfect square. So now there are different factoring here. Not all perfect squares, different things. So I want you to pause and I want you to do 5 through 9 and come back and check. So number 4, there's a GCF there of 2. So when I take out the GCF, it's 49x squared minus 100y squared. That is now a binomial, which is both perfect squares. So that's 7x plus 10y times 7x minus 10y. Here, to check for a perfect square trinomial, x squared is a perfect square. 121 is a perfect square. Square root of 121 is 11. Is 11 times 1 times 2 22? Yes, it is. So that's x plus 11 squared. Here, If you like, I always like to have my j squared in front, so I'm going to rearrange that. And then I'm going to check C again if it's a perfect square, because j squared is a perfect square, 81 is a perfect square. So do square root of 81, which is 9 times 2 times 1, that is 18. So that's j plus 9 squared. 7, 25c squared is a perfect square, it's 5c. 1, but it's minus 1. So minus 1 is not a perfect square. It has to be a positive to be a perfect square trinomial. So this I'm going to try to factor another way. So negative 1 times 25 is negative 25. Numbers that multiply to be negative 25 that add to be negative 10. There aren't any. So there are no factors. So that means this is prime. Number 8. Again, I'm going to rearrange it. So it's r squared minus 26r plus 169. Well, 169 is a perfect square. R squared is a perfect square. Square root of 169 is 13. So I do 13 times 2 times 1. Oh, that is 26. So it's r minus 13 squared. 2 is not a perfect square. Neither is 7. So here I'm going to do 2 times 7, which is 14. Numbers that multiply to be 14 that add to be 9 are 2 and 7. So I'm going to do my plus sign. So it's 7x, 2, and 7. And those are both negative. There are no GCFs in 7x and negative 2. So that's 7x minus 2. In 7x and 7, they can both be divided by 7. So that's x minus 1. So hopefully you got most of those right. So again, I want you to pause and do the last 6 and come back and check. So number 10 is 4 parentheses 2n plus 3 quantity squared. 11 is 4 plus 5a times 4 minus 5a. 12 is prime because there are no factors of 256 that add to be 16. 13 is a perfect square trinomial again, so it's 6x plus 1 quantity squared. 14, perfect square trinomial, so it's 4a minus 5b quantity squared. 15, binomials again, I always look for GCF first, so it's 8m. So it's 8m times m squared minus 8. 8 is not a perfect square, so that is complete. If you have any questions, please ask them tomorrow in class.